All right, well, welcome everyone to today's Process Optimization Academy session, where we'll be doing a bit of a deeper dive into the histogram capability that helps us identify and isolate process outliers and improvement opportunities. The histogram was something that we added in the Tokyo release and then enhanced quite a bit in Utah, and I wanted to make sure that we got it highlighted because it's a very useful capability. Just a reminder that we've moved these Academy sessions to once a month in 2023. So I've sent a few cancellations, but it seems there's still a little bit of confusion or a few folks who have been showing up hoping for an Academy. I don't blame you. These are kind of awesome. Only to find that there is no Academy that day. And I apologize for the confusion there. Just so everyone knows, the updated list of Academy dates can always be found on the Academy page on the community site. All right. Let's get the logistics out of the way for our newcomers and those who have stumbled upon us or one of our recordings for the first time. So the purpose of these sessions are to help us all get better educated on ServiceNow's in-platform process mining capabilities. We'll provide how-tos, practical guidance and use cases, product updates, and as a group, just exchange ideas and collaborate so we all continue to get better. How these sessions typically work is we have a scheduled topic that we'll usually cover for the first 30 minutes, though I think today's is going to be a little bit shorter. It's a very concise topic. Then we'll open it up for questions on the chosen topic for that session. We can open it up for questions above and beyond the day's topic, like more of a sort of an office hours type session. These sessions are all recorded and eventually posted on the community. And then finally, feel free to post your questions in the Q&A section or the chat. I'll do my best to answer them here today. And for situations where we don't have an answer for the question immediately, we always try to follow up and post them to the process optimization community or maybe use them as a topic for a future session. This is the slide that says, hey, anything we say and do here today can't be held against us in the court of law. It's also the slide that says, hey, as part of these conversations, if we make any forward-looking statements about what might be coming in future releases, you should take them as forward-looking statements and make no decisions based on them whatsoever, because they're always subject to change. And I'm assuming you've read the fine print. For those that might have not met before, my name is Dan Grady. I'm part of the product management team here at ServiceNow for our process mining offerings. What we'll do here today, we'll just do a quick process mining 101 for the newcomers and the folks that are not really familiar with the solution. Then we'll dive into how we should be using the process mining histogram. So we'll run through what it is, some common use cases, and then we'll jump over to the instance and demo a few of those use cases. We'll get your questions answered and then wrap up for, hey, if you haven't already started using process optimization, here's how you get started, and here's some additional resources for you. As always, the quick process mining 101. With everything we do, there's a design and desired path in our minds for how it should work and how things should play out, whether that be planning an event like these Academy sessions or a workflow. And when you design things, you design for both efficiency as well as completeness to provide the best experience possible for everyone. Unfortunately, what we design isn't always what ends up happening in reality. The reality is not all work flowing through the process is going to take the optimal path. And that's going to have a negative impact on the experience that both either employees or customers requesting service are having. It's also going to have a negative impact on the people who are actually doing the work and fulfilling the requests. Unfortunately, understanding the reality of what's actually happening within our workflows and our business processes and improving them isn't always the easiest thing to do. What in-platform process mining allows us to do is use the audit log data that is generated as work moves through a given workflow on the ServiceNow platform, and we use that to create a visual representation of what is actually happening within the process. And this new level of visibility is going to help us accelerate our ability to identify inefficiencies, non-conformant process activities, and improvement opportunities. Process mining just gives us the ability to answer process questions that have historically been very challenging to answer. So where traditional analytics will allow us to answer a lot of the what questions about our process mining helps us answer the why. So things like, where is our process getting stuck? Where is unnecessary rework happening? Where are the tickets ping-ponging between groups? Where aren't we conforming to the process we've designed? And these are all things that have historically been difficult to answer and act upon, and now they're available to us in a couple of clicks on the platform with ServiceNow's in-platform approach. We like to say that process optimization is going to get you to the why behind all of your KPIs. And in doing so, that empowers everyone involved in the process to make more data-driven decisions about which improvements to make. Right? There's no shortage of opportunities to improve your process. Having the data you need to actually prioritize which ones to act on first is really important. All right, on to today's topic, using the process mining histogram. So I'll run through a few slides and then we'll look at a couple of quick live examples. First, I thought it would make sense to define what a histogram is. So it's a graph used to represent the frequency of distribution of data points of one variable. Histograms, they often classify data into various bins or range groups. I always find myself saying buckets. And we count how many data points belong to each of these bins or buckets. The example on the slide here is just showing how many students scored in a certain range on a test. Now, how do we apply this to ServiceNow's process mining, or put it in context of process mining from a ServiceNow perspective? Well, in our world, the data point that we're classifying is not a student, right? It's usually going to be some unit of work, whether it's an incident, an HR or customer service case, a lifecycle event, a request, a change, a field service order, or maybe you've built a custom application that have different types of work, maybe a legal matter that you're moving through. And then what we're going to be putting these units of work in is potentially two types of bins, ranges, or buckets. One is a duration bin, and another is a repetition bin. The duration bins usually represent the ranges of time between, let's say, a state or assignment group transition, but it could be applied to any arc on a map. And the repetition bins typically represent the frequency or the number of times a piece of work moves into a state or assignment group, or really any node on the map. On the workbench, you're going to have the ability to choose which bin or bucket you want to analyze for a certain transition or arc or node that's out there. Now, having access to this type of distribution analysis in the Analyst Workbench to help us pinpoint specific sets of work that are either long runners or bouncing in and out of specific states or assignment groups, that's really helpful, right? Whenever we see these types of things, they're typically going to be improvement opportunities or process inefficiencies. The histogram is also helpful in validating some of the average duration values you see in the workbench. Right, so you might see on the map, you see that between the different nodes, you have those arcs and you see some average durations. Well, you know what? Where did the majority of the records fall in that average range there? Are there a handful of long runners that are potentially skewing the average? So it's good for validation as well as helping us start to isolate information. So like I said, this information is really useful, but in the Utah release, we give you the ability to go one step further and start to isolate the map based on the data in the histogram bins. Basically, we give you the ability to start drilling down to focus in on just those outliers that you want to focus in. And again, we'll look at this in action in the demonstration. So the histogram is available by default and can be applied to any and all use cases, but there are four primary scenarios that we see people using it for. The first is looking at repetitions at the activity node level. So in the first example, you see on the screen here, the slide here, what we're going to be doing is we're going to isolate only the incidents that went into the awaiting caller info state 3 or more times, right? So that's kind of like, hey, I see this state on the map, but I really only care about the situations where that's happening more than once. Or maybe instead of state, we choose assignment group as our activity, and we use this to focus on work that is touching a specific team more than once during the life cycle, right? Maybe our process is designed, say something like, hey, once something leaves level 1, it shouldn't come back. And if it does, I want to know about it. And those might be good training opportunities or an opportunity to update a KB with more recent information or something like that. Now, the second example is highlighting duration bins based on state transition time. So in that example, the average duration for work moving from work in progress to close complete was 4 days. But you'll notice that if we look at the histogram, we have 61 records that took somewhere between 3 weeks and 5 days in 1 year. So maybe we want to dig into those specific outliers, like what's going on with those 61 cases one, there might be skewing our average numbers there, but also there are opportunities to improve. In the third example, we're isolating records based on the duration of time between group handoffs. So let's look at work that took longer than 3 days to move from group A to group B, and how many of those records potentially breach some form of SLA. And then the last example is showing us how we can use the repetition bucket or bin on assignment group activity nodes to isolate ping pong situations potentially. Again, the histogram is an always on part of the analyst workbench. So your activity definitions are going to drive the use cases and what the histogram will show. But these four are probably the most common scenarios that I see happening. Okay, last thing before we jump into the instance and take a look at a couple of those scenarios live. I mentioned this a few times, but wanted to make sure it was clear. The histogram was introduced in Tokyo, but in Tokyo, it was only available on activity node, or I would say the arcs, the node transitions on the map, not the actual activity nodes themselves, meaning you'd only see it if you clicked on the arc on the map. We only offered duration bins in Tokyo, and there was no ability to drill down. So in Utah, you'll see the histogram when you click on both of the nodes on the map, or like activity nodes, as well as the arcs, and you'll have both duration and repetition bins available to you. And you'll also be able to drill down based on the selections in the histogram. So it's a big difference in terms of the level of interactivity and functionality between Tokyo and Utah. And the other thing is, if you go to your instance and you aren't seeing the behavior you expect for the release level that you're on, what you should check is just check to make sure that your process optimization plugin is up to date for the release that you're on, right? You want to make sure that you're using the current plugin for the release that you're on, because these are front-end things that sometimes you need to update the plugin to get. All right, now let's jump over to the instance and look at some of those examples live. So the first one that we'll focus on was, we'll just look at that example where we're looking at things that potentially are going into a node on the map, in this case, awaiting caller info, more than one time. So a repetition type example. So I could come in here to my map, and maybe we'll just zoom in, and I'll find my, let's say, awaiting caller info node. So these are my tickets that are going into awaiting caller info. We can isolate that. Then I'll get my pop-up with the additional information over here, and you'll see that I've got my histogram. What this is showing me that, hey, of those 8,400 incidents that went into a waiting caller info, 7,200 of them only went into a waiting caller info once. And then 894 went into that state twice. But what I really maybe want to focus in on is anything in which it went into a waiting caller info more than 3 times. That's a big problem area. So let me focus in, and I'll click on 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I have 2 records that went into a waiting caller info 9 times. That's crazy. And I can come in here and I can click apply filter. And that's going to update my map to show me only the records that went into a waiting caller info more than 3 times. So I had 349 of those. And I can see here now that if I go back to the histogram, it's only going to show me the data for those 3. Now I can start doing anything else, a number of other things, everything else that you're familiar with in terms of slicing and dicing this data. Maybe I want to look at the channel here, and I can see that I've got a bunch of these that came in via self-service and portal, definitely opportunities, but phone, like 39 of these came in via phone, and I had to go back to the user more than 2 times to get additional information. There's got to be opportunity there to improve that initial phone conversation potentially. So let's just narrow it down to those. And now I can come in here, and if I wanted to, I can see which groups or teams. It looks like IT Support Americas is another area where the majority of those things are coming in. So maybe I want to focus in on that team and how they're performing. Again, once we use the histogram to narrow it down, we can start using the rest of the process optimization workbench to continue to hone the information and look for follow-up opportunities. So that's one, looking at repetitions going into a node. I'm going to jump over here to this HR case example to look at the next piece. See if questions come in. Oh, all right. There was a question, will these sessions be recording? Absolutely. All the sessions get recorded and they get posted on the community site for follow-up for those, so you can share it with your peers. Now, next example, we'll just look at this HR case example. And this, again, what we're going to do is we're going to look at maybe seeing long runners that we want to focus in on using the duration bin. So I'm going to come over here to my HR cases, and I'm specifically going to focus in on these HR cases that go from work in progress to closed. And I can see on average, it's taking us about 4 days to move from work in progress to closed. I want to dive deeper into that and see, like, hey, what subset of the data is falling in, where's the majority of the cases falling in terms of time to close or time to move from work in progress to close. And I can see that, hey, of those, a good portion of these are taking less than 2 days to move through the steps, move through that step. And I want to come over here and I see I've got 61 that took longer than 3 weeks and 5 days to move from work in progress to close. So maybe I want to focus on just those 61 long runners that potentially are skewing that average a little bit, and narrow it down to just those. And then I can start using, again, my breakdowns to look at these things. And I see I got 12 of those that were referrals. Like, what's going on with referrals? So maybe I want to focus in on referrals, and I can start to see, all right, ready to work in progress. On average, it's taking us 1 month to do the referral work. What's going on there? And then there is some reopening going on as well. So there's some extra steps in the process. So just an example of using the histogram to identify a set of long running cases, and then being able to narrow it down based on the long runners that might be outliers, so definitely outliers, and skewing our results. Next example is I'll just come over here and we'll do some group analysis, group transfers. That's a very popular use case, is people analyzing kind of who's holding on to the tickets the longest, or how work is moving through different teams inside of the organization. In this example here, I'm going to just start with my finding a definition, right? We've had a whole session on these improvement opportunities that we provide out of the box. So when you mine your data, it immediately calls out an opportunity to improve. So I want to focus in on these multi-hop issues. So incidents that are going through 2 or more reassignments. And I'll just narrow down the initial results that I'm looking at on the map. And then if I want to expand this out a little bit, just so we can see the data a little bit more, I do have this one high volume handoff here, these incidents that are going from this IT support service group to IT support Americas. And if I wanted to focus in on this, right, what I can see now is I can see, hey, I've got both my duration and repetitions buckets on this one. So if I wanted to focus in on just the tickets that took this trip 2, 3, and 4 times, I could do that. Or I could start using my duration bucket to see, hey, maybe I only want to focus in on the tickets that took a long time to move between these 2 groups or to get handed off. So if I come in here and I want to start looking at, let's say, anything that was more than 3 days, took longer than 3 days to go from the first group to the second group, I can do that here. So just isolate those, apply this filter, and it's going to narrow it down to just the tickets that took longer than 3 days to take that trip. Now, the next thing that you might want to do, again, we can expand this out a little bit to see if there's any other paths that were taken. And you can see it's going to a couple of other places. But another way that you might want to look at this, and I don't have the best data to show this, but is if I came over here to my variation analysis and I said, you know what, maybe I want to sort this by the most records. And I can see that the majority of these tickets that took longer than, 3 days to move between that first group and the second group, they stopped, right? That was it. You can see that 123 of them, they found their home in IT Support Americas, and that's where they were resolved or closed. But you know what? Maybe I can start looking at my variation analysis to see if there's any examples in which these tickets went through that trip, but then they wound up being closed someplace else. And again, my data doesn't support it, but if you had a large volume of tickets that came in, took longer than 3 days to go from one group to the next, and then they went to a final group to get closed, that potentially is an opportunity to improve your routing organization. It's like, hey, can I just get it to that last place more quickly, or the ideal place more quickly, and save us those 3 days? So this is just a way that you can potentially use the histogram to identify long-running handoffs in the organization, and then combine that with variation analysis to say, hey, there might be an opportunity to do better and get things to the right place more quickly and save large volumes of time. All right, and now just the last example that I wanted to show here. Let's bring this back to something that's a little bit more manageable, is using the histogram to focus in on just repetitive groups, things that go to the groups more than once, or a certain group more than once. So let's say if I find my, let's say, level 1 desk, right? Perhaps you have a process that dictates things that go back to level 1. Or maybe your process says, hey, once it leaves level 1, it should never come back. And if that's the case, right, I might be able to use the histogram and the repetition bins to say, hey, you know what? I want to identify and look at, let's say, these 183 records, or these records that go back to level 1 more than once in the process, right? Again, your process may dictate that it goes back, but this is just an example of if you are one of those organizations that says once it leaves level 1, it should never go back there, and I want to focus in on those. So now I can use this to isolate down things that go to level 1 someplace else, and then eventually that they're coming back to level 1. And you can look at the groups in which are transferring it back to level 1 more often on the map, or use the variation analysis again to start digging into kind of the scenarios where that's happening more than once. So just 4 examples of different ways that you potentially could use the histogram to identify opportunities or inefficiencies in your process. There's probably hundreds of other ways that you could use this capability depending on which activities you decide to set up, but it's really powerful, very useful to help you start narrowing down and isolating opportunities in your data. All right, just going to bounce over back to the slides, and we'll pause here and see if there's any questions. Does anyone have any questions? I'm going to just check the chat and see if there's anything that's in here. Please, if you have questions, post them in the Q&A or the chat area, and I'll try to address them. Seeing a question here about someone was trying to use the histogram to filter for a few outliers and received an error that the records were too low while the number of paths was too high. I've not seen that one before, but if you could send me a note, I'm interested to follow up on kind of why that might be happening, or take a look at that example with you. I mean, I've applied it myself to the to one record, so I don't see where, I have not seen that myself yet. So I'm interested to see how that's occurring or why that might be occurring. So if you shoot me a note, let's schedule some time to follow up on that one. So another question that's come in: do we have the histogram for all tables that extend from task? Basically, the histogram is going to be available to you for any data that you've mined with process optimization. So it's really a matter of, hey, is auditing turned on for that table? Great. Do I have the entitlement to mine that data with process optimization? Great. And then if you have both of those things in place, whatever activity you choose to mine, you're going to have the histogram available to you inside of the process optimization workspace. So it's not a matter of whether it extends from task. It's more a matter of, do we have the audit data for that table, or is auditing turned on for that table? I hope that helps. Any other questions that folks might have? All right, we'll just come back and check in a second. Just for those that have not checked these out already, you've come here, this might be your first time, or first exposure to process optimization. You might be saying to yourself, this was great, but are there other resources available to me that would help me learn up a little bit more about process optimization or in-platform process mining? And the answer to that is yes, of course. We've got an on-demand training course on the Now Learning site called Process Optimization Essentials, self-paced course, free. It's usually about 90 minutes. That's 45 if you do it at 2 times speed. Very helpful to help you get the basics. We have applied process mining here at ServiceNow pretty extensively now at this point. And we've written a white paper about how we've applied process mining, how we approach setting up a process mining program, and then detailed some of our initial findings for a handful of workflows like incident, change, asset management. HR case, I think, is also detailed in that white paper. There's a really good Forbes article written by our SVP of Analytics, Vijay Kotu, that focuses on the transformative power of process mining on employee experience. So that's something that's worth checking out. You've probably found this session via the community site. But if you're not familiar, there's a specific product hub focused on process optimization or in-platform process mining on the community forum. We post all these recordings there. We post a ton of other content there. It's also a great place for you to post questions that you might have, because we typically check them every day to see if there's any questions and try to do our best to turn around and answer in a very timely manner, usually within the first couple of hours of you posting, if not the day. As many of you have probably learned, is process mining is a new muscle for many of us, myself included, and our customers. And how you use the Analyst Workbench to identify improvement opportunities is a little bit of an art in some ways. So what we've started to do is we've started to document different use cases or common use cases or scenarios in something we call the use case series. So things like using process mining to help us identify work that takes longer to assign than resolve, or how do we use process mining to help us do some SLA breach analysis, or how do we use process mining to help us do ping pong analysis? We've started to record those little brief 5-minute recordings and post them in something we call the use case series that you can find on the process optimization product hub on the community forum. And then lastly, if you wanted to find a session that said, this was great, I want to kind of walk through the steps of what plugins do I need to turn on? How do I create my first project? And what are some of the building blocks for getting started with in-platform process mining? There's a really good Live on Now session available on the community that walks you through all of those things, basically like from start, activating plugins to mining your first project in a matter of minutes. So that session is a super useful way for folks to start getting started. All right, last chance for questions. Okay, someone's asking, how do I find that white paper that you just mentioned? That white paper is going to be available on the Process Optimization Community FAQ. So if you go and you search ServiceNow Process Optimization FAQ, that will get you, it should be the first thing that pops up in your browser search. You click on that and the white paper, there'll be a link to the white paper in there. You could also search for Now process mining. It might come up there, but the best way that I know how to get you there is to go through the ServiceNow Process Optimization FAQ, and that page is going to have a number of links on it, and one of it will be the URL for the white paper. Any other questions before we call it a day? Awesome. Well, I appreciate everyone joining here today. This was understanding and using the histogram session today. Now, remember, only once a month we have these Academy sessions now. So the next one is going to be scheduled for August 11th. And what we'll be doing there is we'll be diving into the new enhancements that are coming in the Vancouver release. And then following that, I've had a number of customers ask me about, hey, is there anything special that I need to configure process mining for a custom application that we built with App Engine on the platform? So it's not a big lift. It's really just a matter of creating, since we don't have a content pack for your custom application, it's a matter of creating a process configuration record. But I realize that we have not spent a lot of time on process configuration records during these Academy sessions. So I think that'll be a good topic for that session in September. As always, if you have ideas or topics that you want us to spend time on, please post them to the community or shoot me a note. And I'm happy to add them to the list of sessions, always looking for topics that would be interesting to our customers. Last question coming in. Good question. Question came in about when do you use sample mining and when do you use full mining? Just so for those that are not familiar, when you create a project to mine, which is you're essentially almost configuring the same thing as you're configuring a report, right? You're picking a table, putting in some filter criteria, and then you're setting what are your activities. So those things on the map, we looked at states and assignment groups today. So you pick the activities you want to include in the map, and then your breakdowns, which you saw slicing and dicing by channel or priority or category are there. So it's really straightforward to configure your process optimization project. Once that's configured, you have two options: full mine versus sample mine. The first time you mine, always recommend that you start with a sample mine. And then what that's going to do is it's going to mine about 3,600 records initially. And really what that allows you to do is just make sure that the activities and the breakdowns that you configured are in line with what you expected them to produce, right? You know, there's sometimes you pick a field as a breakdown and you think it's going to produce one output, and then you look at it and it's like, whoops, you know what? I wanted something different. Or occasionally what you'll see is that you pick a reference field as a breakdown, but that reference field doesn't have the display value set on. So you really need to kind of go one level deeper and pick the label or the display value from that reference table to get it to show up right. So just best practice is to start with a sample mine, just to make sure that your activity definitions and your breakdowns are showing up as you expect them to show up. And then once you think you got everything right, then you go for your full mine. Hope that was useful. Any other questions that folks might have? I got a question about the sample mine. Is it a random sample? I believe it is just going to be it's sequential. It's going to be the first 3,600 records that meet that criteria when it goes to do the query. But that's something that I'll double check and I'll post the response on the community. I know I asked that question before, and the answer, I believe the answer I got was sequential. The first, not random, but I'll double check and I'll post to community. Any other questions? All right. Well, with that, thank everyone for their time. We'll see you next month. And if you have questions in the meantime, please post in the community and we'll get them answered. Thank you, everyone.